There's something about watching someone rise from nothing to the top that makes people stop and pay attention. It's like seeing a small seed grow into a towering tree against all odds. And that's exactly what happened with Alexandra Monroe. Her story wasn't just one of success. It was one of grit, resilience, and breaking barriers in places where no one thought she could. Alexandra didn't have an easy start. Born into a humble family, she learned early on that life wasn't going to hand her anything on a silver platter. She grew up in a neighborhood where dreams often got buried under bills and responsibilities. But Alexandra had something special, a fire inside her that refused to burn out. From the moment she figured out how computers worked, she knew she wanted to build things that mattered. Her journey wasn't smooth, though. As a young black woman trying to make her mark in the tech world, she faced challenges most people couldn't even imagine. Doors slammed shut before she could step through them. People underestimated her at every turn. Some told her she didn't belong. Others assumed she'd fail. But instead of letting those voices bring her down, she used them as fuel. Every no pushed her closer to proving them wrong. Fast forward a few years, and Alexandra wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. She founded Nexora Tech, a company that revolutionized artificial intelligence. Nexora wasn't just another startup. It was a game changer. Its technology helped businesses streamline operations, predict trends, and save millions. Investors lined up to get a piece of the action, and soon enough, Alexandra became one of the youngest self-made billionaires in history. But here's the thing about Alexandra. She wasn't just about money or fame. Sure, she loved building her empire, but what really drove her was making a difference. She believed in creating opportunities for people who looked like her, for those who'd been told they weren't good enough simply because of their skin, color, or background. Under her leadership, Nexora hired more women and minorities than any other tech giant. She made sure everyone felt seen and valued. On this particular day, Alexandra found herself rushing through JFK Airport. She was heading to San Francisco for a big meeting with potential investors who could take Nexora to the next level. This wasn't just another business trip. It was a chance to secure partnerships that would change the future of AI forever. So naturally, she booked a first-class ticket. After all, flying across the country meant hours stuck in a cramped seat unless you paid for comfort. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit that screamed professionalism, Alexandra walked confidently toward Gate 17. She carried only two things, a sleek laptop bag filled with documents and a designer tote holding her essentials. Her assistant trailed behind her, double-checking schedules and reminders. Everything seemed perfectly normal, that is, until they reached the gate. As Alexandra handed over her boarding pass, she noticed the agent pause. His expression shifted slightly, and for a split second she felt uneasy. Something about the way he hesitated made her stomach tighten. Little did she know, this routine flight was about to become anything but ordinary. What happened next would not only test Alexandra's patience, but also force her to confront yet another instance of discrimination. Only this time she wouldn't let it slide quietly. What unfolded over the next hour would leave jaws dropping and send shockwaves throughout the entire aviation industry. The moment Alexandra handed her boarding pass to the agent, she sensed something was off. The man behind the counter glanced at the screen, frowned, and then looked up at her with an expression that seemed equal parts confusion and discomfort. For a brief second, there was silence, just the hum of chatter from passengers waiting in line and the occasional announcement over the loudspeaker. Then, without making eye contact, he said, "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your reservation." Alexandra blinked, taken aback. She'd booked this ticket weeks ago. First class. No shortcuts, no last-minute upgrades, just a straightforward purchase like anyone else would make. She leaned slightly forward, keeping her tone calm but firm. "What kind of issue?" she asked. The agent hesitated again, tapping on his keyboard as if searching for answers. Finally, he spoke. "It looks like, another passenger has been assigned to your seat." He gestured vaguely toward the plane, where people were already lining up to board. Confused, Alexandra scanned the area. Sure enough, near the front of the line stood a man wearing khaki pants and a plain polo shirt. His posture was relaxed, almost smug, as he chatted casually with someone nearby. Something about him didn't sit right. His demeanor screamed entitlement, like he belonged exactly where he was, regardless of who might have come before him. Without missing a beat, Alexandra pulled out her phone and opened the confirmation email for her flight. "Here," she said, showing the agent. "This is my booking. You can see it clearly states I'm in first class, seat 2A. The agent glanced at the screen briefly but shook his head. "Yes, ma'am, I see that. But somehow, another passenger was checked in for the same seat. It's, likely a system error." "A system error?" Alexandra repeated slowly, letting the words sink in. System errors happened, sure, but they weren't excuses for poor customer service. Especially not when you're dealing with someone who pays top dollar for their ticket. She tried reasoning further. "Can you check again? Or maybe reassign the other passenger to a different seat? This is my confirmed reservation." Instead of offering a solution, the agent shrugged helplessly. "Unfortunately, we don't have any other available seats in first class right now. Economy is still open, though." Economy. The word hung in the air like a slap across the face. Alexandra had flown economy plenty of times in her life, back when she couldn't afford anything better. But today wasn't one of those days. Today, she'd paid for comfort, convenience, and respect. And yet here she was, being told to downgrade herself because someone else had decided her seat belonged to them. By now, a small crowd had gathered around the gate area. Passengers craned their necks to watch the exchange unfold. Some whispered among themselves while others pretended not to notice. The man in the polo shirt caught wind of the commotion and turned his attention toward the counter. When he realized he was the center of attention, he smirked, a subtle curl of his lips that made Alexandra's blood boil. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, feigning concern. His voice carried just enough condescension to make it clear he thought this whole thing was amusing. "No," Alexandra replied coolly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of engaging directly. Instead, she addressed the gate agent again. "Listen, I've shown you my confirmation. I've explained the situation. Is there really nothing you can do?" The agent shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "We'll look into it after takeoff," he muttered lamely. "But for now, I'm afraid you'll need to board in economy." That was it. The final straw. Alexandra felt anger bubbling beneath the surface, but she forced herself to stay composed. Losing her temper wouldn't solve anything, and she knew that. Still, the injustice of it all stung deeply. Here she was, a successful CEO, a frequent flyer, someone who contributed significantly to the airline industry, and she was being treated like an inconvenience. As she stepped away from the counter, her mind raced. She could feel eyes on her, judging silently. Some passengers probably thought she was making a fuss over nothing. Others might have sympathized but chose to stay quiet. Either way, the message was clear. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about power dynamics, bias, and the casual dismissal of black women in spaces dominated by privilege. Her assistant followed her, looking equally frustrated. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. For a moment, Alexandra didn't answer. She stared ahead, her jaw tightening as she processed what had just happened. Then, without saying a word, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen as she began drafting a text message. "I'm handling it," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Skylink Airlines had underestimated who they were dealing with, and very soon they'd learn the hard way that actions have consequences. Alexandra sat down in the terminal lounge, her mind racing faster than the planes taking off outside. Her assistant hovered nearby, unsure whether to interrupt her thoughts or give her space. She glanced at him briefly and said, "Get me Nexora's internal app open on my phone." Her voice was calm but carried an edge that made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. Her fingers moved quickly as she navigated through the app, scrolling past messages and updates until she found what she needed: the contact list for Skylink, Airline's executive team. Alexandra had dealt with them before. Skylink was one of Nexoratech's biggest clients. They relied heavily on Nexora's AI software to optimize flight schedules, manage customer data, and streamline operations. Without Nexora, Skylink would be stuck using outdated systems that cost more time and money than they could afford. But right now, none of that mattered to Alexandra. All she could think about was the humiliation she'd just endured at their hands. It wasn't just about being denied a seat, it was about being treated like she didn't matter. Like her money, her status, her very presence was less important than someone else's comfort. That wasn't something she could let slide. Not today, not ever. She opened a new email draft and started typing. Her words were sharp, professional, and impossible to ignore. In the subject line she wrote, "Urgent. Immediate action required regarding discriminatory incident." In the body of the email, she laid out exactly what had happened. She described how she'd been denied access to her rightful seat despite having proof of her reservation. She mentioned the dismissive attitude of the gate agent and the lack of effort to resolve the issue. She pointed out how the situation reflected poorly on Skylink's commitment to fairness and equality. And then came the kicker, the part that would send shockwaves through the airline's boardroom. "I expect a full resolution to this matter within 30 minutes, she wrote. "Failure to address this will result in Nexora terminating its partnership with Skylink effective immediately." Her assistant read over her shoulder, his eyes widening as he processed the weight of her words. "Are you sure about this?" he asked hesitantly. "I mean, it's a huge contract." Alexandra didn't look up. "I'm sure," she said, firmly. "They need to understand that actions have consequences. If they can't treat people fairly, they don't deserve our business." With that, she hit send. The email disappeared into cyberspace, but Alexandra knew exactly where it was, headed, and who it would reach. Within moments, alarms would start ringing in SkyU marketing strategies for airlines. The clock started ticking the moment Alexandra hit send. 30 minutes might sound like a long time, but in the world of corporate decision-making, it's barely enough to blink. Across town, Skylink Airlines headquarters erupted into chaos almost instantly. The email landed in the inboxes of every top executive, each one reading it with growing panic. At first, there was denial. One senior manager laughed nervously and muttered, "This has to be some kind of joke, right?" But when no one else laughed along, reality set in. Another executive grabbed their phone and called the head of customer relations, demanding answers. "What happened at Gate 17? Who messed this up?" he barked, pacing his office like a caged animal. Meanwhile, social media began lighting up. Someone had filmed part of the confrontation between Alexandra and the gate agent. Just snippets. Really, but enough to spark outrage. A passenger posted a blurry video clip showing Alexandra standing calmly, while the gate agent fumbled for excuses. Within minutes, hashtags like "Your Skylink fail" and "Your respect passengers" started trending. Comment sections filled with angry messages, from people sharing their own stories of mistreatment by airlines. Back at the terminal, Alexandra watched the chaos unfold on her phone. Notifications poured in as friends, colleagues, and even strangers reached out to offer support. Journalists sent interview requests, bloggers wrote think pieces, and influencers chimed in with fiery captions under photos of airplanes. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who'd ever felt dismissed or disrespected because of who they were. But Alexandra didn't engage publicly. She stayed quiet, letting the storm grow without adding fuel to the fire. Instead, she focused on what came next. If Skylink thought they could brush this off with a generic apology, they were sorely mistaken. This wasn't just about one bad experience. It was about holding them accountable for systemic issues that went far deeper than a single gate agent. Inside Skylink's boardroom, tempers flared. Executives argued over who was to blame. Some pointed fingers at the ground staff. accusing them of incompetence. Others blamed the outdated booking system that allowed two passengers to be assigned the same seat. But none of these arguments solved the immediate problem. Nexora Tech, a company worth billions, was threatening to walk away. Finally, someone suggested they call Alexandra directly. "We'll apologize," one executive said desperately. "We'll fix it. Just get her on the phone." So they tried. Multiple times. Calls went unanswered. Emails bounced back with automatic replies saying she was unavailable. Every attempt to reach her felt like hitting a brick wall. By the time the 30-minute deadline rolled around, Skylink's leadership team looked like they'd aged 10 years. And then exactly 30 minutes after the email was sent, Alexandra made her move. Through Nexora's legal department, she issued a formal statement announcing the termination of their partnership with Skylink. The press release was short, clear, and devastating. Nexora Tech believes in fairness, equality, and accountability. We cannot continue working with partners who fail to uphold these values. The impact was immediate. Skylink's stock price plummeted. Investors panicked, calling emergency meetings to assess the damage. Passengers canceled flights en masse, flooding social media with complaints about poor service and discriminatory practices. Protesters gathered outside major airports holding signs that read, "Equal treatment for all," and "No justice, no flights." The fallout from Alexandra's decision spread like wildfire. Skylink Airlines wasn't just dealing with a PR nightmare. They were facing an existential crisis. For days, news outlets couldn't stop talking about the incident. Talk shows debated whether airlines had become too complacent in how they treated passengers. Social media users shared personal stories of discrimination and frustration, turning the conversation into something much bigger than one woman's denied seat. It was no longer just about Alexandra. It was about every person who'd ever felt invisible or undervalued. At Skylink's headquarters, the atmosphere was grim. Executives shuffled between meetings, their faces pale with stress. The boardroom became a war zone, with tempers flaring and accusations flying. Some argued that the company needed to fight back, claiming Alexandra was overreacting. Others insisted they had no choice but to make amends, knowing full well that losing Nexora as a partner could cripple their operations. Meanwhile, protests erupted outside airports nationwide. Passengers held signs reading "Respect over profits" and "Skylink doesn't speak for us." People refused to board flights, chanting slogans and demanding accountability. Employees, many of whom had witnessed similar incidents firsthand, began speaking out anonymously online. Stories poured in about racist remarks from coworkers, unfair treatment of minority passengers, and policies that seemed designed to favor certain groups over others. For Alexandra, watching all of this unfold was surreal. She hadn't expected her actions to spark such a massive movement, but she wasn't surprised either. Deep down, she knew how common these experiences were. What shocked her, though, was the sheer scale of the response. Companies across industries reached out to express support while activists praised her courage. Even strangers stopped her on the street to thank her for standing up when so many others stayed silent. But as the chaos swirled around her, Alexandra kept her focus sharp. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. Yes, she wanted Skylink to pay for what happened, but more importantly, she wanted them to change. If they were willing to take real steps toward fixing their broken system, she might consider giving them another chance. But it wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't come without conditions. Finally, after days of scrambling, Skylink made their move. They sent Alexandra a formal proposal, a peace offering of sorts. In it, they acknowledged the discriminatory behavior she'd experienced and apologized profusely. They promised to overhaul their training programs, implement stricter anti-discrimination policies, and create a new executive position focused solely on diversity and inclusion. To show they were serious, they even proposed establishing a $50 million fund dedicated to promoting equality in aviation. When Alexandra received the proposal, she didn't celebrate. Instead, she sat quietly in her office, reading through every word carefully. Her assistant hovered nearby, waiting anxiously for her reaction. After a long pause, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. It's a start, she said finally, but it's not enough. Her assistant frowned. What do you mean? Isn't this exactly what we wanted? Alexandra shook her head. This isn't about what we want. It's about making sure this never happens again to anyone. We can't let them throw money at the problem and call it solved. Real change takes time, effort, and accountability. With that in mind, she drafted a counteroffer. She agreed to meet with Skylink's CEO, but only under specific conditions. First, she demanded independent oversight of their reforms, ensuring they followed through on their promises. Second, she insisted that Skylink publicly commit to hiring more women and minorities in leadership roles. And third, she required quarterly updates on their progress, which would be shared not only with her, but also with the public. Skylink had no choice but to accept. Their future depended on it. As the meeting date approached, anticipation built. Would Alexandra forgive Skylink, or would she double down on her decision to cut ties? The world waited breathlessly for answers. But one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, Alexandra Monroe had already changed the game, and there was no going back. The day of the meeting arrived, and Alexandra walked into a neutral conference room with the kind of confidence that could silence a room full of doubters. The space was simple, just a long wooden table surrounded by chairs, no fancy decor or branding to distract from what mattered most: accountability. On one side sat Skylink's CEO and a handful of nervous executives, their faces tight with anxiety. On the other side sat Alexandra, calm and composed, with her assistant quietly taking notes behind her. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy, like the pause before a storm breaks. Then Skylink's CEO cleared his throat and leaned forward. Ms. Monroe, he began, his voice steady but tinged with unease. Let me start by saying how deeply sorry we are for what happened. It was unacceptable, and it doesn't reflect who we strive to be as a company. Alexandra listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished speaking, she nodded slowly. Thank you for the apology, she said, her tone measured. But apologies aren't enough. Actions speak louder than words. What I want to know is this. What are you going to do differently moving forward? Her question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. One by one, the Skylink executives outlined their plan. They talked about overhauling their training programs to address bias and discrimination. They explained how they would revamp their customer service protocols to ensure incidents like this never happened again. And then came the big announcement. Skylink pledged $50 million to create scholarships and mentorship opportunities for underrepresented groups in aviation, from pilots to engineers to corporate leaders. As they laid out their vision, Alexandra watched closely, not just listening to their words but studying their body language, looking for signs of sincerity. She'd seen plenty of companies make empty promises before, and she wasn't about to let Skylink off the hook if they weren't serious. When they finished, she took a deep breath and spoke. I appreciate the effort you've put into this proposal, she said, but let me be clear. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background. If you're truly committed to change, you'll prove it, not just today, but every single day after this. She went on to outline her conditions. First, an independent auditor would oversee all of Skylink's reforms, reporting directly to her team to ensure transparency. Second, Skylink had to set measurable goals for increasing diversity within its workforce, especially in leadership roles. Third, they had to issue quarterly public updates detailing their progress, or lack thereof. Failure to meet these requirements would mean Nexora walking away permanently. Skylink's executives exchanged glances, clearly weighing the stakes. Finally, the CEO nodded. We agree to your terms, he said, and we promise to honor them fully. With that, Alexandra extended her hand across the table. After a brief hesitation, the CEO shook it, sealing the deal. For now, peace was restored, but Alexandra knew better than anyone that trust wasn't rebuilt overnight. It would take time, effort, and unwavering commitment from both sides. In the weeks that followed, Skylink kept its word, at least outwardly. They launched their scholarship fund, rolled out new training modules, and began promoting more women and minorities into key positions. Passengers noticed subtle changes too, like friendlier interactions at check-in counters and clearer communication during delays. Slowly but surely, the airline started rebuilding its reputation. For Alexandra, the victory was bittersweet. On one hand, she was proud of what she'd accomplished. By standing up for herself, she'd forced an entire industry to confront its flaws and take meaningful steps toward improvement. On the other hand, she couldn't help but feel frustrated that it had taken something so extreme, a billionaire threatening to pull millions in business, to get people to listen. Still, she refused to dwell on the negatives. Instead, she focused on the positives. The young girl who dreamed of becoming a pilot, seeing herself represented in ads for the first time. The single mother working as a flight attendant, finally getting the respect she deserved. The countless passengers boarding flights knowing they wouldn't face the same treatment Alexandra had endured. As she boarded her next flight, a smooth, hassle-free experience thanks to Skylink's newfound attentiveness, Alexandra allowed herself a small smile. This battle might have ended, but the war for equality was far from over. And if there was one thing she'd learned through all of this, it was that even the smallest actions could spark change. Her phone buzzed as she settled into her seat. It was a message from her assistant. Social media's blowing up. People are calling you a hero. Alexandra chuckled softly. Tell them I'm not a hero, she replied. Just someone who believes in fairness and isn't afraid to fight for it. And with that, she leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the hum of the engines carry her toward whatever challenge lay ahead.